The bulkhead is safely on its stand, and work can begin on rust repairs. I will be starting rust repairs at the top, not because I'm a musician, but because the top flange of the bulkhead is invisible. It's concealed by the windshield frame, which is a heavy galvanized steel frame. On the rear surface of the bulkhead, the flange is covered by the upper dash, and it of course supports the upper dash. It's time to figure out how this bulkhead goes together, or what all the layers are, and how are they spot welded together, and how am I going to pry this apart. Exploratory work here. I cut this through and bent this up, and as I suspected, there is an outer stamping of this vent frame up here and an inner one, and they come together, and they're spot welded right along this top edge right here. Time to cut out all of the old rusty metal, at least on the horizontal surface. Probably the most correct way to do this would be to find spot welds and properly drill them out. There is so much rust here. Spot welds will be hard to find, but I'll try. The number of spot welds is low. I'm cutting out the spot welds with the Blair rotobroach tool, which is a type of annular cutter with a spring-loaded center guide. The guide is meant to go into a center punched hole, which is why there is a center punch in the kit. It produces a flat-bottomed hole, unlike a drill bit. And as you can see here, the spring-loaded guide retracts inside the annular cutter, but it's meant to sit in a center-punched hole, and that's how it stays centered. It requires a special lubricant, and if your surface is very pitted, you can put it right into rust pits instead of the center-punched holes, which I tried doing here once or twice. And I separate the panels with this specialized auto body chisel, which prevents me from doing something like sticking a screwdriver with a plastic handle and hitting it with a hammer. It's a hardened, thin chisel, much better to use for this than, say, a woodworking chisel. The last spot weld is the most stubborn here. Removing this old rusty metal with invisible spot welds is a lot of work and takes a lot of time. Here's the patch, just a rectangle with plug weld holes. Got some weld through primer in the back. Goes here under the windshield. Of course the windshield is not physically supported by it because it hangs on these hinges. The patch is made out of 20 gauge or 0.9 millimeter steel, and I'm welding it here, MIG welding it in C25 with a 23 thousandths wire, solid MIG welding wire, with about 5 volts and 45 inches per minute of wire speed. The machine recommended 4.5 volts, but that seemed a little cold. Closer to 5 is better, but still very close to what the machine recommends. To go switch tanks. Replace the metal on this surface. I've cut it out here. It's missing now. I'm keeping the top piece as the original piece. Now I have to cut out this surface in this area. It's less rusty and the rust is further back, but I'm still going to make the weld on the corner like I did there. I have to pay more attention to cutting a very straight line because I had a little waviness here that I had to work with. Hammer and dolly and additional welding, so I'm hoping to do better here by just simply cutting out a straighter piece. That's the piece. The cavities inside between the layers of the bulkhead never received any rust protection from the factory, so I'm wire brushing them and spraying them with weld-through primer as I am priming my mating surfaces. And of course the mating surfaces or panels have to be scuffed up and cleaned with acetone before the weld-through primer goes on them. And then up to the next stubborn piece to remove. This area I'm going to have to make a patch with a 90-degree bend to replace this small area, and then I'll be able to replace the top up here because it welds to this surface, and in this area this surface is missing. So this should be fairly straightforward. There are many spots like this to repair on this bulkhead, and it always involves cutting away the rusted material and then working on a cardboard or a paper template so that this can be transferred onto the metal, the so-called cardboard assisted design. And then once it's transferred, it needs to be cut out. Like a ship captain, I never seem to remember if the red or green metal snips want to turn left or right. I have to keep some kind of a cheat sheet. I do know the yellow one cuts straight though, so that's the easy part. And then the patch is bent, and then it's welded in, and then there is a bunch of grinding, and some of this grinding here will happen off camera because it's a tedious and long process, and one only wants to watch so many sparks. Okay, so this area looks much better. I have a solid top. I have a solid flange, so this is the extension of this inner sheet metal, and there will be the outer sheet metal that's missing right now over here. But now it can be placed on top like so, because I have a surface to attach it to all the way across. It's new metal here, good old metal out there all the way to the middle. So we can get back to the original plan of replacing this surface on top. this is one of the two of the last pieces of steel being welded in. The simple rectangle vertical element of the flange. So we are at the end of this phase of the project, which is rust repairs of the upper bulkhead. And by the upper, I mean the very upper, where the windshield with its rain gutter and its galvanized frame rests on top. This horizontal surface, which traps water in this direction, was completely rusted out, so this is new steel. And this surface, I initially thought that this is something that the windshield rests again, but that's not actually true. It's of course hinges on these hinges, and then it's taken down here. So really the purpose of this entire structure is the attachment of the upper dash, which has grills for these air vents. This is probably stronger than before because of how I did it, but I saved and reused the upper flange of this because it has these depressions, which would not have been that hard to fabricate, but this wasn't that rusty. These square holes accept plastic inserts for sheet metal type screws. So I kept this. This is new. This is new. It's of course tied into the supports back here. So rust free up here. While I was at it, I did some work on minor rust on these frames. So next phase, we're moving down the bulkhead. I will replace this whole area, and then I will reattach the rain gutter that I removed over here. The previous owners over the last 40 years had issues with what I believe is called fuel polishing, filtering the diesel fuel for the engine, and they haphazardly attached some filters and other things here, so there's just too much damage here. And I'll be doing this with future proofing in mind for the wiring harnesses and other details. So thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.